are they on track to have high quality lives right here in Wisconsin, right here in Milwaukee. And if anything, it shows that we have so much more to do. We have a chance to be able to, the same folks that are the sons and daughters, grandsons, granddaughters of folks that had access to a Milwaukee in the 60s that used to flourish. Even in that time of turmoil, they were able to flourish at companies that invested in good wages, good benefits, and those jobs, for the most part, are no longer in existence here to the same degree. Part of my district reaches the 30th Street corridor. There were once over 20,000 jobs right in the heart of the city, and that business park now has jobs only in the few hundreds, if that. We really need to see a transformation of our communities, and to ensure that we have families that have access to high quality jobs, high paying jobs in high growth sectors of our economy. I think of the many Black folks that have lost their lives or been the victim of police violence right here in our own community, where we had our own uprising in 2016. Seville Smith, back in 2016 in the Sherman Park neighborhood, lost his life, and the whole community was in uproar for a good reason. A lot of the focus at that time focused on destruction and focused on looting, but much of the things that were already in destruction, already were looted, were the promise of their dreams right here in this community. So as a community organizer before I was elected, and now as an elected official, I do make it my obligation to make sure that I'm fighting for those same individuals so they can get what they are owed right here in this state, right here in this community.
Thank you so much, Representative Bowen. Now we'll turn to Angela Lang to introduce herself and start us off here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm definitely being mindful of the time for the moment of silence. I appreciate the space. As mentioned, I'm an organizer. My day job is being the executive director of Black Leaders Organizing for Communities, but I'm here officially in my formal or my informal capacity, my personal capacity, and not on behalf of Black. And I think it's important for us to be able to have this conversation in such a hard moment, in a hard time. I'm born and raised in Milwaukee. I have never lived anywhere else. And I choose to do so because Milwaukee is home. I feel like Milwaukee has raised me, and I want to be very intentional about the work that I do here. I work every day to try and build long-term Black political power here in the city, to make sure that we're having justice and dignity. And we know that Wisconsin is one of the worst places to raise a Black child. We're home to one of the most incarcerated zip codes. There's so much organizing that needs to be done, and really trying to build electoral power, but then also really understanding that voting is just one tactic, and how are we showing up for our communities in a way that is more transformative and not transactional, having people understand the political process so people know how to reach out to County Executive Crowley and State Representative Bowen, and to have those conversations and making sure that we're living and we're advocating for cities where we can have the ability to thrive and live healthy, thriving, safe lives the way that other people are afforded that opportunity.
Thank you so much. At this time, as I said previously, we will have a 8-minute and 46-second moment of silence in honor of George Floyd, and in partnership with our partners across the country. So I ask that you join us in a moment of silence. Thank you, everyone, for joining us in the moment of silence in honor of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor and so many more. I'm sorry, but I thought about struggling for life in as long as we just took the time to be silent, and I don't know what to say. But thank you for joining us in that moment. We'll continue with our program now. And go ahead. You want to jump in?
No, I just want to say real quick, just reflecting on that, and I did the kneel for 9 as well. It really does remind you how long 8 minutes, 9 minutes really is, and the amount of time I was able to pray for his family, his life, those who loved him, those who love Black people, and just really not taking that time for granted. It just reminds you of just how long, literally, where you feel like it's not going to, you feel like it's over, but it's still more left. And how much his life really needs to be honored, how much Black folks need to be prioritized and preserved in this country.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. Are there any more reflections from our, we'll get back to our introductions, but if any of our panelists had any reflections, I'll take those too.
I think for me, I was really just thinking about, as the time was going on, what could he have been thinking at this point? Halfway through, did he know that he would be murdered in a few minutes? Did he know his life was going to end? And just really reflecting on how long that was, and that slow torture, and that the lack of dignity is just really powerful, and it's just really long, and really understanding how excessive it is. I think we talk about excessive use of force, but why are we using any force at all? Understanding that everyone has different ideas of what excessive is, and just really trying to put myself in that situation, and just wondering what his last thoughts and his last feelings were in that moment. And I think it's really moving, and I hope everybody really understood just how long that was, and how it was a slow burn and a slow execution, and there's really no other way to put that.
Thank you for that, Angela. It makes you think about also what the accusation was, and whether that there was some accusation about forgery or something, whatever it was, and that that's the if you really believe that should be the penalty for that, and taking his life in your own hands in that way, it's just it's too much. We'll move on to Maria Hamilton, and we'll let you, Maria, also, if you had any reflections from our moment of silence, but then also introduce yourself to everybody who's joined us here.
Hello, everyone, and thank you all for having me. First, I'll speak on my reflection. I literally was terrified for that 8 minutes, saying that I am a mother who still grapple with the fact that someone would be so misplaced in the mind to not appreciate and respect a human life. My reflection also was about him calling for his mother, who is deceased. And it made me reflect on my relationship with Trey. And it also made me think about, as my son was being murdered by Christopher Manning here in Wisconsin, I was actually calling him and leaving him a voicemail on his phone as those 14 bullets pierced his skin. It's horrific. And then for the world to actually see those 8 minutes in real time, it's just unbearable. I pray for his family. I just continuously just want to lift them up. I do have arrangements to meet with them before the very next memorial. And I'm just in awe right now with just how Black people have been treated for 400 years. And this country is great on our backs and in our blood from our ancestors. As for my introduction, I am the mother of a young Black man who was murdered April 30th, 2014, broad daylight in the metro part of Milwaukee downtown. Actually, the park where Trey was killed, Red Arrow Park, is right next door to the City Hall building. That day that Trey was killed, like I said, it was midday. It's a lot of students in the area. A lot of our leaders work in that area as well. And he was actually profiled as a homeless man by a Starbucks manager, and she didn't want his presence close to a vendor stand that they had in the park. So she called the police a couple of times. They came down, talked with her, and told her that he wasn't doing anything wrong. He had every right to be in that park. And she called again. They came out. They didn't speak with Trey that time. They just asked her to stop calling the police department. In turn, I'm not sure when it actually happened, but there was a voicemail for Christopher Manning, who was the B cop in the area, to come to Red Arrow Park because there was a suspect in the park. We found out that there was a wellness check on the books with 911. Christopher Manning received it, came to the park, and he started doing a pat down on Trey. I guess at some point Trey actually resisted, and they kind of started scuffling after Trey was struck 7 to 8 times with the baton. Trey gained control of the baton, and Christopher Manning pulled out his gun, and Trey met his demise with 14 bullets. I didn't watch the news that day, so I actually got a phone call at 12:01 from the detectives telling me they needed to talk with me. To make a long story short, Trey had been dead 7 to 8 hours before I was contacted. After that point, I pretty much went into shock for 4 months. I buried Trey on my birthday because the county actually held his body out. And if I had to wait another 48 hours, I wouldn't have been able to say goodbye to my son. I would have had to have a closed casket. In the state of mind I was in, I told them as soon as you all could get his body ready, hey, let's bury him. And that was my birthday, which is May 9th. I'm an activist now. I'm a community worker for our people now. I'm a peer specialist. I've taken that training. I'm the founder of Mothers for Justice United, and we focused on trauma with women and families here in the city of Milwaukee. I'm also one of the mothers of the movement who traveled with Hillary Clinton and the Democrats in the election year of 2016. And I'm also one of the active members of Mental Health of America, and I have a seat on the Behavioral Health Task Force for mental health in Milwaukee as well.
Thank you so much for that, Ms. Hamilton. And just thank you for everything that you're doing and for putting your story forward.
Thank you.
All right, we'll talk some more. We'll get to more, but I do want to make sure that we introduce our last panelist, and that's County Executive Crowley. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. I want to say, thank you to you all for organizing this event. Thank you, Angela, David, for being here. Maria, I always want to say thank you for sharing your story like many others throughout the country. And to reflect on that time for that moment of silence, about halfway through, I almost had to hold tears back. Because I'm literally thinking about myself. I'm thinking about my uncle. I'm thinking about my brothers. I'm thinking about my dad in that situation. And for that time to go by, I can only imagine what was going through George's mind. And I had the luxury to be able to put so much. I had the luxury of thinking happy thoughts during the 9 minutes. And I know that he didn't, because he had so much more on his mind. Because, when I think about the symbolism or seeing that video of an officer standing on the neck of a Black man, and just a few years ago, we were protesting about the right to kneel here in America. It shows something a little bit. It shows us that we, have to realize we're in the middle of two pandemics. Okay, this is two pandemics, right? And COVID was winning until racism came around. If you actually think about it, and we're going through racism, we're dealing with this pandemic. But I think it's extremely important, that when we think about everything that's happening, we have to take a step back and realize that we cannot tell hurt people, traumatized people who have been suffering so much pain, how to react to their trauma. We also have to be conscious that we all have a role to play in the movement. Every role isn't for everybody, but we all have a role to play in this movement. It's about recognizing that role. And this is really about, how we lean on one another, not only because we can't, physically be near one another, not because you're dealing with COVID-19 and we need everybody to protect themselves, but also when you think about racism and the racial injustices and the fight for racial equity or any type of equity in general, it's going to take all of us coming together. And with that, I'm David Crowley. I am the Milwaukee County Executive. I am the first African-American elected to this seat. And many of you may know on this call that Milwaukee County is one of the most segregated places in the country. And so when we look at what we're seeing across the country, that is something that's near and dear to us. And getting elected, and today is day 30 for me, in the middle of a pandemic, in the middle of the uprising. I'm learning not only a lot about myself, but this community. And I think that we should look at this as a turning point. And it would be a missed opportunity if we don't utilize this moment, not only to make change in this community, but really build upon the policies that absolutely need changing in order to provide that pathway. And so I know as a politician, me personally, I can talk a lot. So I'm gonna shut up because I know for me, I wanna make sure that we can have that good dialogue. And I just wanna let folks know that I support what is happening and how this community is coming together to let their voice be heard. But we also have to do everything that we can to protect our community, absolutely. But again, we cannot tell people how they need to respond to the trauma that folks have been literally suffering from for decades.
Thank you so much, Executive Crowley. And we appreciate you. Congratulations on your new position, and good luck, my brother. Day 30. As a former city manager myself, good luck.
For sure. Thank you.
So I do want to get over a little bit and to talk a little bit in the way of policy. I am proud to work for Joe Biden, and I'm proud to work for this campaign. He was the one, if not the first, one of the first national leaders, definitely before Trump, to go out and say anything about George Floyd, and particularly to call for the firing of the 4 officers, and then to say that there needed to be more and that they needed to be prosecuted and convicted. So I will, I'm proud of that, and I'm proud that Joe Biden is the kind of person who's come out and been a national figure on the stage when we've needed leadership. We've needed someone out there, and we lack for that across the country. But the other thing that he's done is he has put forth a plan, an agenda for Black America. And that plan is called Lift Every Voice. And if I can, I will ask my colleagues if you will type the link into the chat box. That link is joebiden.com/Black America. And the Lift Every Voice plan is essentially a plan to step in and make sure that some of those impediments that have prevented the Black community from thriving as it should are removed. It has 6 pillars. They are economic stability and economic mobility and the creation of wealth, removing health disparities and focusing on healthcare in the Black community, expand access to quality education, and making sure that the criminal justice system works for everyone, a focus on civil rights and for voting rights. And then also finally a fight for environmental justice in the Black community. There are some high points that I would love to talk about. I think the criminal justice plan has things in it, whether it's the closing of privatized prisons, the abolition of the cash bail system, decriminalizing marijuana and expunging the records of those who have marijuana convictions. On the education side, across the board, Joe Biden is calling for universal pre-K. He's calling for more funding for Title I schools across the country. And on the collegiate side, he's calling for loan forgiveness for all public institutions. And particularly, he's calling for loan forgiveness for HBCUs and other minority-serving institutions when students leave school if they're not making more than $125,000. So I think there's a lot of great stuff in the plan, and we have talked about it, and I know that our panelists have seen it. So I just wanted to kick it to our panelists to just talk about what your thoughts are on Joe Biden's policy for Black America and his agenda going forward. I know I've had these conversations with Representative Bowen already, so I'll turn to him first to talk a little bit about the policy, and particularly, though, how these policies in these areas impact the work that you're doing right now. And then, because this is a living document, if you have things that you think need to be added to it, we'd also like to hear that. So I'll start with Representative Bowen.
Well, I think one of the things that I think about how do we ensure the folks that can determine this election, how do we ensure that this agenda connects with their lives? And, we know for a fact that there is a generation of folks living and growing up in Milwaukee and in other communities around Wisconsin with significant African-American population. And they are being left out. They are being deprived of access to the economy. They're being deprived of access to some of the things that the generation that came before them once had. And without that stability, without that promise, you lose all hope in a system that should be built on fairness. It should be built on hard work or the other values that everybody seems to talk about. But at the end of the day, you also know that it's very limiting for the folks in your community, the folks in your neighborhood, especially as you look at how Wisconsin has over-incarcerated certain parts of the state. The 53206 zip code is in my district. And I share that with other elected representatives and local elected officials. And we know for a fact we have a system that's built to hold 17,000 people, and we currently hold about 24,000. We have prisons that are busting at the seams, and it is hard to get the buy-in to understand that we have over-incarcerated. The only services and investment that we have made to areas like 53206 have been criminalization, have been just adding more police, have been just focused on not actually investing in people's lives, but investing in their demise. So I think at the end of the day, this agenda has to reverse that. This agenda has to make sure that those same individuals that otherwise, when you compare them to their white counterparts in the suburbs or, the individuals that have access to post-secondary education opportunities, access to the workforce and some of the high growth, well-paying jobs in the economy, that they have that access as well. They have the ability to invest in entrepreneurship and their dreams and goals that are just as valuable as their counterparts.
Thank you so much for that. I think you're absolutely right. Is that, we have to remove those impediments and have people have equity in the process. I'll turn to Angela now. And one of the pillars is related to civil rights and voting rights in particular, and making people really live out the creed that you have this inalienable right and you need to be able to do it. I'd like to hear. There's so many things I'd love to hear from you, whether it be about how the process went to vote during COVID and the obstacles that put into place, because that's something that we're going to have to look at in the fall. But I know that in the Biden plan, one thing that it does is it creates legislation to bring back the rights that were taken away in Shelby case with pre-clearance in Section 5, and making sure that those obstacles aren't in place there. I just love to hear your thoughts about that pillar and about voting rights and access to voting, and how voting is made harder in the Black community.
Yeah, I think a lot about democracy and who has access to it and who doesn't. And we can paint a very clear picture of the people that are harmed by voter suppression efforts. We know that there are people, every state is different, but in the state of Wisconsin, after you've done your time and you're out, if you are still on probation or parole, or what we call on paper, your voting rights haven't been restored. So you are walking around trying to get a job, trying to assimilate back into society, and you are not allowed to make your voice heard. You're also struggling to find housing. You're struggling to find a job because you have to check that box to say that you were previously incarcerated of a felony. And I've seen so many people do so much work and their voting rights haven't been restored yet, but they're still knocking doors. They're still making their voices heard. They're still talking to people. And I think we need to really talk about what happened in Florida with their ballot measure to restore people's right to vote, and what happens if you were convicted of a felony. And we know how the criminal justice system has disproportionately impacted Black, Brown, and Indigenous folks. And then depending on the state that you live in, that also impacts your voting rights as well. And I think there's a really big intersection between the criminal justice system, or I would say injustice system, and the ability to vote and make your voice heard. We can talk about prison gerrymandering and how people are counted not even in their city where they're from. So we see all of these different voter suppression efforts. There's certain people. We see Republicans intentionally try to limit the voice of Black and Brown voters because they know how much power we have. I would like to see voting rights restored, not just upon release, but also people being able to vote while they're in jail or while they're in prison. They deserve that same representation as well. And that we understand, again, this intersection of how the criminal injustice system is impacting our community, and how it's a way for us long term to not be involved in the civic engagement process and really thinking about what voting rights is. We have a broader conversation all the time with friends and family about what civic engagement is. Civic engagement isn't just voting. It's being able to make your voice heard. It's testifying at city budget hearings. It's writing your legislators. It's sometimes I can pick up the phone and I can call Representative Bowen, or I can call County Executive Crowley and say, hey, I have a concern. That's what being civically engaged is. But constantly seeing these voter suppression efforts, if it's due to gerrymandering in Wisconsin, prison gerrymandering specifically, or how we're limiting the rights, we can also say that we're limiting our own democracy. And at the same time, how can we actually call ourselves a true and robust democracy if we're limiting whole groups of people, whole demographics of people? It's very clear who they're targeting. Like I said, we can paint a picture of who is being left out and who is systemically having their voice silenced. And I think, honestly, gerrymandering, prison gerrymandering, voter suppression, photo ID, having to vote in a pandemic, people having to make the choice from having their voices heard or staying safe and healthy, that's hardly a robust democracy. And there are so many times that we've heard reports that people had requested a ballot within the deadline. They did everything right, and they still weren't able to get a ballot on election day. And due to the rules being that you had to postmark your ballot on election day, you can't postmark something you don't have. And so people woke up on election day and said, hey, I requested a ballot within the deadline. I did everything right. My ballot never came. What are my options? And I had to tell friends and family, your only option is to vote on election day in person. And in a robust democracy, that we should be making it easy for as many people as possible to vote. We shouldn't be having people make that choice from remaining safe or making their voice heard.
Absolutely, I think those were all great points. Just in follow up, what were some of the things that you did or advised folks because out with voting during COVID, and so what kind of safeguards did y'all have? And I'd love to hear that from our electeds too. But what kind of things were in place?
I know for me, I'm the political friend out of some friend groups. And so they were hitting me up. They were trying to keep track of all the information that was flying around. And it was hard for them to keep up. On one hand, they saw one article, and then a couple hours later, they saw a different article with completely different rules and deadlines. So we did our best to try and get that information out there. And I think what we tried to do and what I try to do and a lot of folks in my circles was really try to get out the message about being able to request a ballot in person as soon as possible. I know that there's some lawsuits that are currently going through the system right now and making sure that deadlines aren't changing. People aren't able to being forced to wait until the last minute to try and figure out that absentee voting is an option. There were people that didn't know that absentee voting was an option for them. And so I think if we can say that there's a silver lining, a lot more people know that they're able to request a ballot, and that is a way for them to make their voice heard. And I think we need to do everything that we can, not just for the November election, but Wisconsin has an August election as well, to make sure that people understand that there's an option to request an absentee ballot, and that you can make your voice heard in a safe way. And I think we need to push out that message.
County Executive Crowley, I know you've only been there for 30 days now, but part of in the county, the goals are to make it safe for voters, and right. So what strategies are you taking to make sure that people can and will vote?
Well, it's a lot that we're trying to do here in Milwaukee County. I mean, we got a good clerks here in Milwaukee County, but it's really those local municipalities, those cities, towns, and villages, making sure that they have the absolute resources that they need. And so we have to continue to lean on folks like Representative Bowen, and lean on the governor's administration and all of our allies in the state legislature to really push the state legislature to bring the resources back. And so, at the end of the day, I mean, this is really about how do we get the resources so our local municipalities, because you can't just come up with a one size cookie cutter, decision on this, because you have so many different communities. I mean, when we seen the election on April 7th, if I'm not mistaken, it feels so long ago now, 4 days before the election, we were getting conflicted messages. And so I guess if you have to think about like, how do you get ready for a COVID-19 election, fall cycle? It's really about just staying proactive and being prepared. We're talking about pushing everybody to get on the absentee ballot, but, sometimes it's better to ask for forgiveness than it is permission. Just have everybody go request it right now. Just if they can do that, continue to push that message right now, because that's what we need in this community. It's weird because I realized I was looking at you, so I'm sorry. But so we have to do everything that we can as leaders to say that we need the resources to make sure that our clerks can get these ballots out. And I think that what happened here in Milwaukee was very unique. I mean, this is a place where it's the largest city in the state of Wisconsin. We went to having about 160 polling locations to having 5. Let me repeat that. We had 5. Okay. And so when you think about, well, what do you put into place? I think that, they did everything that they think that they could have done. I think that we could have done a little bit more, but to have people, and I'm glad that we had a really, really great day of weather here in the Milwaukee area, because you don't get that too often where you have good weather during an election where people can stand outside for that long and still be able to cast their ballot. And so, that's what we have to do. And then, just to go back to one of your questions was related to, Biden's platform. Here in Milwaukee County, we're really focusing on how do we make sure that we continue to keep racial equity at the top of that list, but also thinking about, how do we become one of the most healthiest counties in the state. And so in order to do that, you have to focus on wealth, which is small businesses and education. And I think we have to continue to invest in that here, particularly in a place where we are predominantly people of color, and making sure that they have that stepping stone. But we also have an issue, which is near and dear to me, is issues related to housing. Not enough people have permanent housing to make sure that they're not continuing to go through this cycle of poverty. We have to make sure that even when we give people housing, what kind of wraparound services are we giving those folks? And then the other piece that I would say is the healthcare itself. I mean, when you think about COVID-19 and what the recovery looks like, I mean, this is directly impacting people of color here in Milwaukee County. It's about 2/3 of the cases here in Milwaukee County directly impact Black and brown people in this community. And so we have to make sure that when we're making decisions that we look through a racial equity lens, particularly during a pandemic, particularly in a crisis, because it's easy to forget about those that are being directly affected. And I think that we also have to use this opportunity to really show this community, what does it mean to be fair and what does it mean to be equitable? Because when you think about the impact that COVID is having on different communities, we don't need somebody to give everybody one. We need to make sure that we're giving out and helping out those that are being impacted the most disproportionately.
Thank you so much. wanted to turn to Maria and ask you one of the things that the vice president is doing right now is preparing some things that he wants to do in his first 100 days. And looking at your community and looking at the work that you've done, and looking at the closeness that you have to the Clinton campaign, what are some of the things that you think would be most beneficial for the vice president to be doing right out of the gate in his first 100 days?
Thank you for that question. We need special prosecutors that aren't connected to the police department when these shootings and this abuse actually come forward. Right now, we do have the Michael Bell law, and the police departments in the state of Wisconsin still are breaking the law by not actually following that piece of legislation, because they pick and choose who they actually want to do the investigations, and they're not transparent about it. And then we have the district attorney who has never put a police officer, held him accountable for shooting or abusing anybody in our community as well. So we need to have prosecutors that aren't linked to any kind of police association whatsoever. It's been trying time the last 6 years to try to amend that bill, because we have majority Republicans in our legislation right now, and they won't even hear the different amendments we have to the Michael Bell law. Our police department say that they're all differently ran, but they're running on the same particular models of how they actually practice and police Black communities. There's two different justice systems in the state of Wisconsin and across the United States for Black and white people. I think we need to tear it down, because it's designed that way. It's designed to do exactly what it's supposed to do. And that's to separate and keep us divided, like everybody has been talking about today. We have so many people in prisons in the state of Wisconsin, and there's no reform in these prisons for people while they do their time. So they don't have a clue when they get ready to get out and try to reestablish themselves in our community. We need to start holding our elected officials who make these laws accountable. David has been doing so much in the legislation, but nothing ever goes through when it deals with helping the Black communities in Milwaukee. And it's not his fault. It's the fact that a lot of legislation that we actually live by was created centuries and centuries ago. And with us having the GOP over that, they won't gavel in and will not gavel out. So that's a big problem, because we have people in Milwaukee in Wisconsin, making legislative laws and changing things whenever they want to, without the people's, without us in mind, or we don't have a voice. We go and we talk to them, and we're actually hit with threats when we go to Madison up on the Capitol, like going to Madison and lobbying to have one of the representatives take his gun out of his house and lay it on his desk and ask us to leave his office. So we're not being heard. We need to find a way to come together so our voice is big, where we can remove those peoples out of those positions that are making laws that govern us that don't apply to them.
That's a great point. And it's, it's important to remember, it is those local officials who have that direct impact on your lives every day. And so we have to think not only about going and voting for Joe Biden, but we got to go vote for mayor, and we got to go vote for council, and we got to go vote for all these folks who are making these decisions every day. I think we're going to turn to a few audience questions at this time. And so I'll, if they're for the campaign, I'll help to field them, but we'll turn to the panelists to talk about them. So our first audience question, and I'll have my colleagues to open up the line, is from John Carroll. John?
Yes. I just talked to my grandchildren, and I can tell you they're not going to vote for Joe Biden. They're not going to vote for anybody for president. They will. They won't vote for Trump, but they're not going to vote for Joe. And I would like to ask Vice President Biden to make his primary goal once he's elected, to end the daily injustices that African Americans suffer in our society. I would like that to be his work's daily focus. I've lived here for 50 years in Milwaukee. Segregation hasn't significantly changed. The public schools have not improved to the point where Black children are catching up with white children. Housing's not markedly improved, despite the city's efforts in that area. Black unemployment remains ridiculously high, and the imprisonment of Blacks is shameful. We can decide to put an end to these inequities so that 50 years from now, we're not having the same discussion. I know the solutions are costly, but Congress just came up with $3 trillion to help the economy through COVID-19. We can find the money to end racism. Will Vice President Biden pledge to make that his principal focus once he is elected?
So to answer that, John, and thank you for your question. We appreciate you coming on. I will say one thing, John. If you are indeed a supporter, we're going to need your help to get your grandchildren to understand that change can't happen unless we get out there and work for it and vote. So hopefully you're encouraging them to utilize this right that so many are fighting for and to go out and vote. I will say that the vice president will be putting out an agenda that expresses his view on the first 100 days of his administration. And part of that is addressing racial inequities across the board, where it comes to healthcare, where it comes to wealth creation, and where it comes to social justice and policing. So we will be hearing about that agenda here soon. And he will continue to work on the agenda items for that we have in our plan for Black America. So those policies will be worked on in the early days of the Joe Biden administration. We'll turn now to unless we have panelists that want to add to that or add to what you think the focus of the administration should be in its early days. All right, we'll turn to another question from Jill Budney. If we can open up Jill. All right, we'll move on to yes, Jill.
Hi. So I fully support the protests, and I'm just curious about what happens next to harness this energy so that we can produce lasting and structural changes that will end racism in this country. So I'm just curious for the panelists about what next steps you might recommend. So obviously defeating Trump in November, but I'm curious what you all think about the possibility of a new federal civil rights bill. And if you'd support something like that, what specific components would new civil rights legislation have to contain in order to ensure economic equality for all people, to enact criminal justice reform, to protect voting rights, to pay reparations to the Black community, to guarantee equal educational access and equal access to healthcare, et cetera. So I'm just curious what you think about maybe new civil rights legislation for lasting change.
I think, I'm sorry, Trey, I'm just going to hop in because I think that's a great question. We need to throw everything at the wall and see what sticks, to be quite honest with you. But I want to be clear, is that, just because we put in law doesn't mean it translates into practice, right? And so we have to make sure that whatever that we are putting into law and what we're fighting for is that we're also talking about how do we change the culture on how people behave and react, because not everybody's going to be with us, right? And so it's important that we also think about, like, what does that look like in practice? Because just because you put a law in place, and we've learned that dealing with the Republicans here in Wisconsin, that you can put a law in place, but then they change the rules up, and then you realize that it doesn't matter what the law is. It matters what the administrative rule is and how you actually apply the law. And so it's going to be critical that we think about that. But I think that you have to have, I think that right now we have to have a real conversation about dignity in general. And I think it's really about lifting, Black and brown people and helping them understand that, we have dignity. People look at us with dignity and that we are accepted here in America. And so, I think that that's going to have to be a piece. But, we talk about freedom, but what does that really mean? And how is that defined for a person of color, right? And it's going to take some true change. I think we should be doing exactly what you said. But if we don't put the practice in, if nobody's going to act on it, we're not going to be doing ourselves too much of a favor.
I think
go ahead, Angela.
I was gonna say, if I may, because I feel like I hear that question a lot of, like, what's next or what can I do? And I think we need to be really intentional with the language that we're using. I think, I've heard some people call it police misconduct. It's a murder, point blank, period. He was murdered. Everybody else that died at the hands of the police, it was murder. And I think
conservatives are saying that, by the way.
Right. We need to have very strong language that it's not just a couple bad actors. We can talk about law enforcement in this country and the history of law enforcement, and understanding the history of law enforcement was designed to capture slaves. And it's just evolved into the system that we know now. So it has its roots in white supremacy, and we need to be very intentional as leaders, as elected officials, to use that language and to really be bold in having those conversations. I think even on an individual level, I need white people to talk to their racist family members. I need y'all to have those uncomfortable conversations at the dinner table. This is a really pivotal moment. I was in college when Trayvon was murdered. And I worked at an office merely 2 blocks away when Don Trey was murdered, and the air feels different. We're living in this moment that feels very different in a way that I've never seen before. And we need to make sure that we're all in line with what is actually at stake, and that we're having this national conversation as a narrative. We need to bring back this conversation about reparations and what is reparations. It's not just a monetary thing. Being able to talk about what civil rights abuses have been happening and being able to have those honest conversations. We need to talk about the school to prison pipeline and how it is a way to funnel young Black and brown and Indigenous kids into the prison system without really any means or any way of coming back. So I think as a society, we need to have these conversations and to have these honest conversations in a way that is amplifying the voices of Black, brown, and Indigenous folks, and being able to provide that pressure and that momentum so that elected officials can lead as well, and also being able to provide that cover. I think sometimes elected officials, obviously not the ones on this call, but elected officials are scared to be able to be bold in a way that will disrupt and upset the community, because you have to toe a certain line. But if we as a community, allies, and everybody alike can be very bold in our demands, we can provide that wind on their backs in a way where people can able to be bold, and we're not merely settling for incremental change after generations of public lynchings and, quite frankly, genocide.
Absolutely. I would just say really quickly, it's really important that that white people have a conversation with the law enforcement agencies that know how to provide dignity and good service to them because they're white, and have a bold conversation about what the numbers look like and why things change for Black folks at those same law enforcement agencies. And the outcomes that they provide, the poor service that they usually provide for residents of color and especially Black residents. You can look into your use of force standards for your police department. You can have a conversation with your chief about the officers that have been reprimanded. We know that in the case of George Floyd, the officer in that case that was on his neck had 18 prior disciplinary things on his record, actions on his record, and a lot of them weren't even addressed. A lot of them were kind of just shooed under the rug. And usually you will find officers that will not really take into account them having a good reputation. And we don't want reform where we're trying to keep bad officers from doing bad things, because that goes nowhere either, right? We also know that there are solutions that sometimes are thought to work, but they don't really work. And implicit bias training, as well-meaning as it can be, does not get at the heart of changing the outcomes to ensure that Black folks aren't killed in police encounters. And we have to make sure, especially as we have a situation right now in Wisconsin, of several cases where officers have not been held legally accountable for the harm that they have done on individuals, especially Black individuals that have lost their lives.
So we have one more question. If we can, we'll be able to get it in if we do it quickly from the audience, and that's Leela Bell. Is Leela here? All right. Deborah Gregory. Do we have Deborah Gregory on the line? All right. All right. Well, let's see. I think they were muted. All right. Well, we'll do this. I do want to thank the panelists. We're running up on time here, but before we end, and I could go on talking to. Hello, Leela. We're having trouble hearing you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes. Go ahead.
I would like to know what kind of testing would be done, because I can remember applying to be a cashier at Toys R Us, and they gave me a psychiatric test, like if you saw your coworkers stealing, what would you do? That type of thing. I would like them to do, if you, like what happened to George Floyd, if you see a man dying and it's at the hand of your partner or your coworker, would you intervene, or would you, like the other three did, stand back and let it happen? I would like to see more psychiatric testing. And I would like to know what Joe Biden, what are his plans for that as far as police reform?
And if you could, I think, mute your line. Thank you. So the Vice President is going to be putting out, and we're working through right now, a police reform portion to our first 100-day strategy on that. So I would love to be able to give you have continued discussion on the back end. I think there are lots of ideas around it, and I know some of your local officials. I actually just talked to Representative Bowen about this or about policing in general. So I think there are some ideas there. So I'll let him get a crack at this too. But I think across the board, we're going to have to look at immediately some police reforms. One thing that the vice president is looking at, and one thing that's out there is Hakeem Jeffries' chokehold bill, and becoming supportive of that. So right off the top, the vice president will be looking in the first 100 days to do some of these reform efforts. But I will throw it to Representative Bowen to quickly just give us some of his thoughts, because I know he has some in this regard. I think you're muted.
There we go. And let me just clarify, the question was around police accountability and actual measures. One of the things that we have right here in Wisconsin that we're pushing, the bill literally died in the last session that we had, was AB 1012, one of the bills I was lead co-sponsored on. And we wanted to ensure that every police district across the state would ensure that they solidified their use of force standards to preserve life, that illegally would force officers to use every measure other than lethal force in situations, and to adhere to de-escalating situations. It's really important for us to make that transition, especially as we have situations that are preventable. And it's just very clear that officers don't have to use firearms, don't have to use methods that literally risk people's lives repeatedly. So that's one of the things that we have on the table here in Wisconsin. And I would hope there are more measures that are going to end up coming down the pipeline from the federal level.
Thank you so much. Now, we are running up on time, and I really appreciate everybody coming, but I do want to give everybody a minute or two here just for a closing statement. Any last thoughts? This is a really good conversation. I can sit around and talk to y'all all day. I might just call y'all back on Zoom later tonight and just chat. But I would like to get any closing thoughts from anybody on this discussion, Wisconsin, Milwaukee, anything that you have. And I know that Executive Crowley had to jump off, so to our remaining panelists. We'll start with, I see Maria's mic is open, so we'll throw it to Maria first. There we go. Maria, any closing thoughts? I don't think Maria can hear me, so I'm going to throw it over to Angela for any closing thoughts.
Yeah, first of all, thanks for having the space. I know specifically right now, these conversations can be very difficult and challenging, and I've been moved a couple times and wiping away tears occasionally. And I just want to honor the pain and the trauma that we're all feeling and experiencing right now. I think it's really important for us to really think about our local elected officials, our mayors, our DAs. In some places, if people have fire and police commissions or community oversights, and really understanding the power that we have in there. At the bare minimum, being able to follow the money, as people say. In Milwaukee, nearly 50% of the city budget goes to the police department, while we're funding the health department, which houses the Office of Violence Prevention, at 2 to 3%. And that seems very lopsided. And we really need to start to make investments into our communities and to really have the tough conversations about what safety is. Safety clearly does not mean more law enforcement. Safety means investing into mental health. It means investing into young people and having living wage jobs in youth programs. It doesn't mean investing half of a budget to the police department that only responds to crime, and as we're seeing now, perpetuates it and causes the crime. And what it looks like for us to use our own taxpayer dollars to fund our own oppression and murder in some cases. And I think we need to have those conversations. And it's hard because we've been conditioned to think that police departments and law enforcement are there to save us and to help us. And I had a good friend of mine. She talks about, if there is an increase in fires in a neighborhood, people don't say, hey, we need more firefighters. People say, hey, what are the root causes for the fires? Do we need more education? Do we need more smoke detectors? That's how people respond to fires in a neighborhood. And we need to think about crime in the same way. We shouldn't be adding more police officers. And we need to think very strongly and very hard and have these strategic conversations about investing in our communities and divesting specifically from law enforcement.
Thank you so much. And thank you for the work that you do daily. I'll throw it to Representative Bowen. Any last words?
Yeah, I want to jump in and then allow Ms. Hamilton to bring us home. First off, thank you so much for the invite to be a part of this and, the after meeting invite so that we officially have the Wisconsin molding of the Lift Every Voice Black Agenda plan in the Biden campaign. That would be kind of fun. I think Angela's just kind of thinking about already what she's going to put in there. But I have to highlight the fact that neighborhoods need more than police. They need more than a police department. And when I first got elected, one of the first things I wanted to do was to reinvest in a pool in the 53206 zip code. And it would have taken $20 million for us to pull it off, and we could not find the resources to do it. But every day we silently find the money to incarcerate as many people as we want. We find the resources to take MRAP trucks, which are mine exploding protection device trucks, transfer them to police departments and so that they can use them on the job where they don't really need devices like that. Those things are built for war, and we've militarized and built our systems so that they are responding in a way that we don't even recognize is needed right now. We are over criminalizing our communities, and we have a chance to really invest in pools or in public health, in access to recreation and access to education and access to things that all neighborhoods need. And we know it works because white neighborhoods have all those things. And we need to make sure that we can invest in Black neighborhoods the same way.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for your legislative work. And I do look forward to the after party conversation where we'll talk about those Wisconsin tweets to lift every voice. I will try to throw it to Maria. I think she was having trouble hearing us just recently. Maria, do we have you back? All right. I'm so sorry because I did want to hear from Maria. But I will do this. I will say that one, we have a lot of great questions in the Q&A. We will try to answer all these questions offline for you. So if there are direct questions to the representatives, we'll try to get them to the representatives or the panelists here. If there are direct questions for the campaign, we will try our best to answer them and get back to you. But thank you for those questions. Thank you for listening intently. Thank you for giving us the room to honor those who have been killed with that moment of silence, which I thought was very powerful, and I just appreciate it. And I feel, I don't know a lot of you, but I feel close to you for having shared that moment with you. So thank you so much. It looks like Maria is off and not going to be able to give us any closing. So I just will say this. Our team here will be reaching out to you with links, with follow-ups, letting you know how to get involved in the campaign, letting you know how to organize around the campaign. Make sure you go and you check out the Lift Every Voice plan. That's joebiden.com/Black America, where you can go read. Please read through the plan. So many things that people say that they want around criminal justice reform, around healthcare, around creating wealth is actually in the plan. So we hope that you will read it and hope that you can take it and run with it. So with that, thank you to our panelists. Thank you to the folks who came to listen to us in the audience. And we look forward to having more of these. And we look forward to talking to you soon and coming back to Wisconsin. Have a great day.
This program is a production of WisconsinEye, an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit media network with a mission to inform, educate, and engage the citizens of Wisconsin. WisconsinEye is the nation's first and only independently funded state civics broadcast network, providing gavel-to-gavel access to government proceedings and events at the state capitol.